people are not being recruited to work at Bristol City Council, certainly in the top couple of tiers of management of council officers, that actually have any real qualifications or know what they're doing at all. They're friends of friends, and this kind of cliquey nepotism is the sort of thing that leads to these decisions being not made or things left undone by people who aren't really qualified. And I suppose I could say the same about the biggest white elephant on the planet, pretty much, which is Hinkley Point C. This week, this nuclear power station, the third version of nuclear power down at Hinkley, near Minehead, on the Bristol Channel, not far from here, Hinkley Point C has been delayed again, and project costs have rocketed. And I'm joined on the line by Roy Pumfrey from the Stop Hinkley campaign. Roy, you guys have been going ever since at this one ever since I think it was 2016 when it was first announced, haven't you?
Oh, longer than that, Tony. The first inquiry into building a Hinkley C was in 1988, but it did take them until 2008 before they actually moved forward at all. And things got into gear here in 2011.
So what's this latest announcement? Apart from we've got the costs nearly doubling from the original announcement, which was, I think, 15 or 16 billion it was supposed to cost initially. They're now saying 35 billion. But that's kind of normal, isn't it? The doubling of the cost of something, especially when it's a white elephant. But what about the length of time it's going to cost to build the thing?
Okay, can we just hang on the money a bit? Because that's a 2015 price, and in today's money, it's reckoned to be £46 billion, which is an even bigger cost increase. So it is a huge amount of money, and EDF's problem with that is that the Chinese co-builder has put a stop to additional payment, if you like, and said, no, we committed for a certain amount and that's all we're going to give you. And the latest we've seen is that EDF are likely to come cap in hand, or with something more stronger than that, demanding money from the British government and us to finish building it, let alone pay the extortionate price for the electricity once it's actually, if it ever generates.
Okay, so let's just get it clear about who's paying for this. This is EDF, which is the French nationalised government. Effectively, the French people, the French government, and China. But China is now turning off the money tap.
That's correct. It was committed for a third of the original 18 billion estimate, and as having been turned away from other British potential nuclear builds, has said, well, we're not. If we're not getting in anywhere else, we're not stumping up any more money than we originally committed to for this. So they've turned the money tap off, and EDF is in deep financial trouble. There are questions from the union members of the EDF board as to why they seem to be pouring money down a bottomless pit in the UK when they have enough issues with their own nuclear reactors to absorb £100 billion. So what are they sinking more money in here? So they don't. It's not a bottomless money pit as far as EDF are concerned. And having people here in the government have said all along, oh, this is no bother because EDF are paying for it. And according to the Financial Times, it's just about to become a bother because EDF are getting cold feet about putting their own money anymore into the project, and are going to be looking shortly for a government bailout.
Well, how far is it nearly built now?
No, nowhere near.
Because it sounds if EDF are pulling the plug on the funds and the Chinese, one does wonder whether one is going to be left with this kind of hulk of the power station that might have been down there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even by their own current estimates, it will be 2030/31 before there's the remotest prospect of any electricity being generated by Hinkley C. Too late to do any good for our immediate concerns about preventing climate change and keeping the temperature rise down below 2 degrees. So that in itself is an issue that Hinkley C won't solve. And it was interesting that last year EDF went to the government and said that we want to extend the last dates at which we can come online with Hinkley C and still get paid the colossal price per kilowatt hour that we're demanding, that was negotiated and is rising all the time. And they've had that extended to 2036.
Okay,
so even by their own estimate, it could take as long as 2036. And whilst that would be, they'd not be happy with that, at least they'd be confident they'd get paid top dollar for 35 years after 2036.
Well, that is what they're doing in a way. They're betraying the fact that this isn't the last announcement of delays and cost overruns.
No, of course not. And there'll be more.
And how does this sort of price that we're paying for this electricity from Hinkley compare to, say, gas or coal?
Oh, it's heaps more. If people look at the National Grid website about how electricity is being generated and how much it's costing, it's really interesting because it's a spot price. So it changes every 5 or 10 minutes. And there are occasional peaks in demand in very cold weather when there's much less wind and there's no solar or less solar. Occasionally, the spot price of electricity comes up to what Hinkley C's electricity will cost 24/7 for 35 years. Okay, but all the rest of the time, and especially at night time, they're virtually giving electricity away off the grid because the current nuclear power stations are generating 24/7 and it has to go somewhere. So it is amazingly cheap in the early hours of the morning. But that won't be the case for Hinkley C because they've got 24/7 promise on how much they're going to get paid, an exorbitant amount.
So this is the energy dashboard, I think, isn't it? Energydashboard.co.uk. Right. A very interesting little website for nerds like you and I to keep an eye on what's happening.
I mean, the other staggering thing about that is when we're paying 30 pence per kilowatt hour, that translates to £300 per megawatt hour. And the actual cost during the day would rarely, if ever, go above 150 and is much more likely to be well under £100 per megawatt hour. So what we're paying is at least double and usually 3 or 4 or 5 times what it's actually costing the electricity companies at source.
Does Stop Hinkley go so far as to say what they think should happen instead of Hinkley? Because I remember this is a few years ago now, sitting down with the environmental journalist Paul Mobbs and figuring out that for half the cost of Hinkley back in the around that would have been about 2017, 2018. For about half the cost of Hinkley, you could have a tidal system in the Severn Estuary, in the Bristol Channel, generating as much power. I mean, I don't know if that's, we're only amateurs sort of playing with figures from the Maygen tidal system up in Scotland. But, there's certainly, there's a great potential for tidal, isn't there, around here?
Absolutely, especially in the Bristol Channel, just out the window. All right, there's the second highest tidal rise and fall in the world. Utterly predictable, reliable, consistent. You know exactly what it's going to be, not just from day to day, but from year to year. So that's easy to predict how much electricity will be generated. That's the real joy of it. And it will become cheaper to do that once some prototypes that look like underwater wind turbines and other devices like that come on stream. But the government isn't putting any development money into that because it's obsessed with new nuclear. It's just thrown 1.6 billion at the proposed new nuclear power station in Suffolk, Sizewell C, and that's just money down the drain. Because if they spent anything like that on improving the insulation of people's houses, even if you've got a gas-fired system, the fact that you're needing less heat from somewhere is a saving and a benefit to the environment, and is a lot cheaper than subsidising new nuclear. It benefits people with their current bills and is a great deal cheaper than throwing money at new nuclear power stations.
what about the accusation that this is ultimately a military thing, that the plutonium produced in the power stations after it's been reprocessed and taken out of the radioactive uranium, spent fuel rods, that's actually one of the main byproducts which the military love. They sort of rub their hands at every new bit of plutonium that's created in one of these stations. We've just heard a few weeks ago from the United States, they're threatening to start again to store their nuclear weapons here in, I think, at Lakenheath, and on British soil anyway. So this is another sort of side effect of this nuclear power that many of the Greens who are now moving towards supporting nuclear for climate change reasons seem to sidestep.
It's not something that I'm particularly familiar with. I've heard stuff, but it's not an area of expertise, Tony.
Martin?
Well, we know that the development of nuclear power was because they'd got nuclear weapons, and therefore they decided that they needed to do something else with it as well, because they were generating all of the plutonium and uranium. And of course, the Indians developed their nuclear weapons on the back of the Canadian peaceful reactors, which they got in. You know, they bought in Canadian companies to Candu, I think it was, to create nuclear power stations in India, and it was that was quite clearly to do with their drive to get nuclear weapons. And of course, countries like Japan have nuclear power because they haven't got any fossil fuels. So that you can see that the decisions about these things are not always made on financial terms, because as just been pointed out, the economics of it don't make sense. But of course, countries will want to have nuclear power for other reasons, which are not necessarily entirely directly economic.
And aren't there other smaller scale reactors that could be being built instead, Roy?
Yes. Don't. Small modular reactors. Yeah, it's a bit like nuclear fusion, Tony. Nuclear fusion, which is supposed to be, of course, the clean way to get power from the atom, that's probably 30 years away, and it always will be. Nobody has yet got a small modular reactor to work anywhere in the world, and I've seen no signs in the information that's come my way that we're anywhere near doing that. Rolls-Royce is so confident about the fact that theirs will work that they're demanding the full upfront cost of all the development and a contract for 100 of them, or a large number of them, before they'll do any more than just draw some designs. So it's absurd. And who'd want one of those on their doorstep?
Well, you certainly can't bank on something like this that hasn't been properly tested. What about the liquid thorium reactors? I keep hearing about those as well.
Not an area of expertise.
No.
Tony.
So, I mean, if you're going to want something to replace good old coal-fired power stations, you're going to have to come up with something else, Roy, aren't you? What are you going to come up with instead of nuclear?
Well, offshore wind, onshore wind, if people can be persuaded.
No, sorry, because when the wind doesn't blow, you haven't got any power. You need to make sure you've got that power.
You can store that electricity, okay? Storage batteries. Mr. Tesla has already got one of those up and running in South Australia. So it can be done and it can be put to there. And the same with solar. You can store that as well. I mean, that's what people in Africa who are out a long way from anywhere, haven't got any power connection, but with a solar, a photovoltaic cell unit, a solar panel and a battery, can get light at night, even though the sun's gone down. And on a bigger scale, we can do that here.
This EGR, which they're building at Hinkley, is a European, I think, gas-cooled reactor. Am I right?
No, it's an EPR.
EPR.
It's pressurised water.
European pressurised water reactor. Thank you for correcting me. How successful have they been where they've been fired up elsewhere?
Don't. No. I mean, you'd think on home turf, EDF would have been able to, have a, pristine, wonderful, 100%, demonstratable, model out there to show everybody. But the one in Normandy, Flamanville, that's still not working, and it is. I've lost count of how many years late it is, and massively over budget again. The one in Finland, is supposed to be limping along, but that's even further behind where it was meant to be and massively over cost as well. The ones we don't hear much about are the ones in China, Taishan. The first of those started up with a big fanfare, but has since stopped down for over a year, and I'm not up to date with whether they've been able to restart that. The second one is supposed to be working, but it's not exactly a track record you'd be proud of. If you were trying to sell it, you'd struggle.
Yeah, well, they are. They're trying to sell it to the politicians and the public. So, yeah, apparently Taishan is just about going again. Looking at, I'm not sure if it's on full power or anything like that. Martin, what do you make of this return to belief in nuclear? It was something that happened in the 1950s and 60s here in Britain, and then it's like people fell out of love with nuclear, but now they're back in love with it again.
Well, I think what's politically it was it was the 3 Mile Island disaster in Chernobyl. These things, I mean, Chernobyl, for example, had and Fukushima had a massive impact on politics in Germany because the Greens committed to getting rid of nuclear power straight away and all the rest of it. I mean, I did do a paper about the economics of nuclear power for the New Economics Foundation back in the 1980s because the Thatcher government wanted to privatise British nuclear fuels. Because like they wanted to privatise everything. And, of course, when the City of London looked at the books, they said, we're not touching that with a barge pole. So I think nuclear power has never really been, once you take into account things like getting rid of the waste and so on, it's never really been economically viable. But countries want to have nuclear power for geopolitical reasons. They want to develop nuclear weapons, and having nuclear power is a step to that, if that's what you want to do, and something that lots of countries do. And the other thing is, if you can't rely on the oil or gas supply from somebody else that's got a hold on you, you can imagine the kind of thinking going on at the moment. We're going to war with Russia, and we've got to be independent of their gas and oil and all the rest of it. But a lot of it is just inertia. It's just that the nuclear industry is very good at lobbying. And then you get the sunk costs. I mean, the EDF in France, I mean, they've developed a huge stable of nuclear reactors and so on, and they could probably generate more nuclear electricity than anybody else. And once you've done that, even if you're losing money, you're stuck with it. Because that's the pattern, you're path dependent on the previous decisions you've taken. But, I mean, and I think, China and Russia, for example, are going out pushing nuclear power in the developing world, but China and Russia don't entirely have market economies. So I would argue if you have a properly functioning market economy, nuclear power just isn't attractive.
There is this article in the Times this week, Roy, about it says it's Alistair Osborne writing, saying the growing mountain of wasted money is a radioactive prospect. He's saying that this is basically going to come and bite us on the bum in the years to come. And it's Rishi Sunak's determination to press ahead with these mammoth investments in new nuclear reactors, whatever the cost, might not prove to be the best solution, he says. Of course, by the time it comes to the end of the year, it's almost certain that Sunak is going to be history anyway. So what is the future for nuclear, do you think?
Bleak, in a word. I think they will struggle to complete the construction of Hinkley C, and it will take a lot of time to get it, if they can get it to work, and there's no guarantee that that's going to happen. So it's all happening too late to make the impact they want. They talk about Hinkley providing the electricity for 7% of people's houses, which would be a mammoth number, but if you do proper insulation for a kickoff, that reduces demand by 7%. So that just wipes out part of the rationale for building Hinkley. Sizewell, apart from the massive local resistance to building in Suffolk a second new nuclear power station, they have a huge problem with water supply. It was only ever the Chinese that were interested in a new site at Bradwell in Essex, and the other ones that have popped their heads up, Wilfer in Wales, I think it's Hitachi, wasn't it, that walked away from that because they needed a deal that would make it pay, and they couldn't get that. And I've dismissed small modular reactors already, I think the prospect of well, let me put it this way, Tony. The solar panels on my roof are currently producing more electricity than any nuclear output in Somerset. And I expect that to continue to be the case for probably 10 more years at least.
Well, I agree. And then before he died, I had a very interesting chat with John Large, the nuclear engineer who worked for the Fire Brigades Union and other people, and he was absolutely convinced that Hinkley would never be completed. He said all you need to do is to look at the EDF's other commitments. The fact of the matter is this is really at the bottom of the line for them, and for the Chinese to pull out financially, saying we're not going to be putting any more money into this. At least you see they are saying, aren't they, saying effectively, Roy, look, we're not throwing good money after bad.
Exactly, and that is their problem. That they spent a lot of money on putting a steel structure up and putting a lid on it. Well, bully for them. But there's the 80-20 rule, all right, that the first 80% of what they do will cost 20% of whatever the budget turns out to be. But the last 20% will cost 80% of the bill and take 80% of the time. And that's the jam they're in. That's what they found at Crossrail. Just doing those last things cost them a huge amount on the budget they had to do that, the train across London, and an inordinate amount of time extra to what they'd allowed for in the first place.
Sounds like one of those old cartoons we used to watch as kids, that the closer you get to the end of the plank, the slower you go. And actually, you never really getting to the end of the plank. So anyway, look, Roy, how do people follow, keep an eye on Stop Hinkley and what you guys are up to?
Right, we have a Facebook page, the Stop Hinkley page, where we have followers who are contributing, and we're putting stuff on that. We obviously have a website, stophinkley.org, and well, now and again, people like your very good self interview, and we're happy to talk to any media, any time, who've got an interest in this topic, this hopefully never too hot topic, but something that should be more at the forefront of people's minds, really, because the amount of money it will cost them in the long run doesn't really bear thinking about. No,
and us as consumers buying electricity.
Yes, sorry, that's what I meant. I meant us as consumers. Yeah.
So thanks, Roy. Martin, we have a white elephant, effectively, don't we? And what's your thoughts about whether this is ever going to be finished?
Well, I tend to concur with everybody else who are the experts saying it won't be, and it doesn't sound as if it will be. I was reading about this week that somebody on the board of EDF resigned over this because he's saying this is stupid. We've got enough problems managing our existing stock in France, and I think that's probably, eventually things like this will not get done.
And
that's
so
what will happen. It'll just be a waste of time.
Another nuclear expert I spoke to about this, Dr. Chris Busby, and it's lovely to speak to an expert that isn't in the pay of the industry, was Dr. Chris Busby. His thoughts about this, Martin, were that actually this has nothing to do with building any kind of nuclear power station that's ever going to connect up to a grid. It's all about the construction contract. That's where these people are going to make their money, and they've already made it. And once that they've got close to this point that Roy was talking about there, where suddenly the costs have to go up for them to make that sort of get over the hump to finish the thing, they're off.
Yeah, but I mean, somebody ultimately has to pay the price, and obviously at the moment, what Niels Pratley in The Guardian was saying is it's EDF who looks as if they're on the hook here, and that the board made a mistake in actually agreeing to go into this project. Now, obviously, I haven't looked into the.
But it's like HS2, isn't it? It's rather like very like HS2. At some point, the people responsible for it say, "Well, look, there's no point in even trying to finish this because it's going to cost way too much. We're never going to recoup our investment."
Well, that's right, and of course, people have been subcontracted to build it. Will get their money and walk away, won't they? Because they didn't take any of the risk. They're just doing. They tell build us a concrete something over here, and that's what they do, and they get their money and they go away. And of course those contractors then of course may be lobbying for the continuation of the project, because for them it's a gravy train.
But it's a wonderful country. It's a wonderful government. Actually, I do think it's a wonderful country, wonderful people, an appalling government. But the government is now saying, in the guise of the Ministry of Defence, that they might have to conscript us to go and fight the Russians. What do you make of this?
Well, it was that retired general who made the remarks in the Telegraph, wasn't it? And then the government itself then immediately poo-pooed that and said we've got no plans for